Now, September the 15th, 2020 was a day we all watched with hope and love in our hearts as Israel signed a Memorandum of Understanding, the Abraham Accords, with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The Israeli Prime Minister called it a pivot of history. Until that point, it might have been unthinkable, and yet soon other countries followed: Morocco, Bhutan, Sudan, and talk of more. So is this a new Middle East where peace reigns supreme? A little earlier, I had the chance to explore the amazing times we're living in with the people who it affects the most. From the United Arab Emirates, a Fulbright scholar, former global shaper at the World Economic Forum, and a best-selling author, as well as a member of the US UAE Public Affairs Committee, Omar al-Busaidy. Omar, welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm glad to be here.
And from Israel, someone who has realized the potential of the Abraham Accords to build concrete links to the neighbors of the Jewish state, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur, Hassan, Nahoum. Fleur, thank you so much for being with us.
It's always great being with you guys.
And I know you guys are friends, so Omar, let me turn to you first. What did the signing of the Abraham Accords mean to you personally? And how have the Accords been viewed in the UAE?
For me personally, Michael, it was a moment I was always waiting for, because I can finally now talk to all my Israeli friends, like, without having to go through a different area code or something like that. So for me, I've always said it several times in different interviews since the signing of the Abraham Accords, I've always had Jewish friends and I've also had Israeli friends. We just used to communicate in several different ways. And the Abraham Accords, personally, for me, was just a great way to finally connect with my friends without having to do it secretly. And I think for the region and for our country especially, I mean, we're always proud in the UAE to talk about how we have people from all over the world that live there. I mean, Fleur has been there. She can tell you all about how the UAE is very multicultural. And now, we just saw, since the signing of the Abraham Accords, over 130,000 Israelis travel to Dubai and the UAE. So it's great to see that. And this is exactly what we were always waiting for. And it's great to finally connect with, literally, they're our cousins. It's not even just like that. It's literally Islamically, or in Judaism as well. Muslims and Jews are cousins. So it's good to see them.
Fleur, people have been amazed by the pace of normalization and peace. And you were very quick, I know, to travel to the UAE and to Bahrain and to make business and other links with these countries. Please do tell us more.
Well, the truth is that we felt that there was kind of a speeding up of momentum in the last year. And my co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council, Dorian Barak, has been telling me for about 2 years, the new horizon for Israel is the Gulf. That's going to be our new horizon. And one day I said to him, why don't we just create something and see what happens? So we did this in June, not knowing, not imagining for 1 second that in August we were already going to be having a signed agreement. So when that came, we were so excited and so thrilled. Within a few days, we created an online platform for people to do business together. Today, we have almost 4,000 members between our platforms, very active community. And I couldn't hold back. I just thought, this is the moment where the region is going to change. And this is, inshallah, what the next 50 years could look like with regional partners, friends, and cousins. And Omar is right, because from the moment that's from an intellectual perspective, from an emotional perspective, the moment I got to Dubai, it felt like a long lost cousins reuniting. That's how it felt. It's like, we're also curious, but what have you been doing all these years? Tell me how you eat. No, how do you eat? What are you doing? So there's all this excitement and curiosity and just thirst for getting to know the other, and just real warmth. This is why I believe this is a peace like no other. I give all the credit to the UAE leaders, of course, Mohammed bin Zayed, who was the first person. It's easier now to join onto the Abraham Accords, but you needed one brave leader to be the first, and that was him. So we have to be very grateful for the visionary leadership of the rulers of the UAE, and I think it's a very good match. because we're both similar size, the population countries. We're both the leading economies of the Middle East. And like Omar said, very diverse, very open-minded. And it's just exciting to think that my kids will know nothing else than this, than peace, than love, than friendship and warmth. And that's exciting.
Historic times indeed. Go ahead, Omar.
I'm surprised they let Fleur leave the UAE, because when I looked at her, she looked like she was in her natural habitat. So
this is what Omar said to me once. Are you sure you're not?
They needed her. She's the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Omar. They needed her there. It's okay, but she can come back.
Michael, I think somehow it'd be easier to run to be the mayor of Dubai. I think it's a nicer time.
Oh, without a doubt.
I think it would be nicer.
Omar, what? Tell us what you think, in your eyes, are the interests of the UAE and the Gulf countries in general that align so well with the state of Israel?
A lot of the times when you look at a lot of the interviews, there was always this discussion that, the UAE and Israel, we share, common like threats in the region and everything else. But away from the threats, there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of similarities and a lot of like good things. I want to get away from the politics of the threats part, because we all know already all that. But as Fleur mentioned, especially when there's the connection of cultures that is to come together, and there's the things that we can learn together. Like we are so close to, our countries are so close to each other. Like this is the time now to like embrace that and help to nourish that even further. The language, number one, is something that I wish that I could have learned it in the UAE. And I know now we have like schools opening up and institutions to teach us Hebrew as well. And I know already most Israelis can speak Arabic. I'm like, why can we learn Hebrew? Like we're supposed to do that too. So this is the time now to get to learn that, to understand it. And again, it's historical, it's biblical, it's something we should have been connected with for a long time. But for so many reasons, it didn't happen. And this is the opportunities that we should be seeking. And then also, I've always been, I'm an entrepreneur as well. I have my own business, and I've always been in entrepreneurship, and particularly in tech. When you mention tech and you think of Israel, like that's the number one country in the world when it comes to innovation and technologies. I've always wanted to go and see, okay, why is Silicon Valley buying up all these startups in Israel? What are they doing? What's behind that? What is in their head? And I love education and entrepreneurship, as you mentioned in my book. My book is all about that. So I want to go there when I get a chance, go and visit Israel and meet all these tech companies, learn from them. And there's so many issues around the world that we can solve with technology. So I want to be able to connect with people there to see what my cousins have been developing, what are they going to be developing. So the UAE sees these opportunities, and they want to start building that bridge before it's too late. And as Fleur mentioned, the UAE, in many ways, we've always pioneered a lot of things. Building the tallest building, building this, building that. But now we should be the first country to build this bridge with a country that is just a few hours, 2-3 hours away from us, and take it from there and see how other countries can prosper as well.
And Fleur, we mentioned that tens of thousands of Israelis have flocked to the UAE. Flights are opening up to Bahrain and to other Abraham Accords countries. Now, Israel, of course, made peace with Egypt in 1979 and with Jordan in 1994. Both of those agreements have held, but how are these new agreements different?
So, well, it's completely different, but let's just put things in the context of the day. We really can't judge whether, if we would have made peace in 2020 with Egypt and Jordan, with WhatsApps and Zooms and everything else, whether things would have been different. We don't know that. But unfortunately, what we do know is that the peace was made top down and not bottom up. And that means that the incitement in the school curriculum continued, even the boycotts in sports and culture. There was really nothing that was done to try and help the peace to trickle down to the regular people. And what we see here is something totally different. A, because we don't have borders with the UAE. So thank God there was no never been any bloodshed really between us. We've never had wars. It's always been by proxy. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that this is a people to people peace. Yes, the leaders signed, but that was all they did, and everybody just went whoosh. We're making peace, and that's basically what's been happening. I have to tell you, from the beginning of the signing of the peace accords, 120,000 Israelis have been to the UAE. I know that number because I spoke to the ambassador today. He told me that number. And that's incredible. You know, Dubai was going through difficult times of tourism in December because of Corona. No worries, the Israelis showed up. Now that we should be happy. But in general, people are very, very happy about this. And I can tell you, I've been on a couple of trips now for work, but I went also on a family holiday. I wanted to take my family to Dubai. First of all, they want to go back, they want to move there. But secondly, everywhere I went, all I heard was Hebrew. I'm like, where am I? And on my flight to Dubai in December, and this is the most exciting thing, and people forget about this, 60% of my flight were Arab Israelis. And no, we don't talk enough about this, but the Arab Israelis are thrilled that they can go on a holiday in a place that is culturally similar to them and they speak the language. And people don't talk enough about this. And let me tell you, I'm not going to get political, but the reason why the Arab parties in Israel have lost a third of their voters on polls is because they did not support the Abraham Accords, and the Arab population did. And that is very telling. And I've flown a few times now. I've sat with Arab, Israeli, and Palestinian business people who've been doing business for years. And they're thrilled that now they have a direct flight. And so all in all, everybody is very excited from all walks of life in Israel. And thankfully, everybody that I've met in Dubai, in the UAE, are thrilled about also coming here in the near future.
Omar, I must ask you, because Fleur mentioned the education system. Yeah. And so one of the flaws, I guess, of previous attempts for peace, and one of the problems that Israel has in the region, is that in a lot of countries there is incitement in the educational curriculum. Now, I know that the UAE sees itself as a bastion of tolerance and coexistence. So tell us more how that's manifested itself.
You know, Michael, in the UAE, we've never, ever had, although I went to a private school, so I to be fair, I did my GCSEs and everything. However, even people, yeah, I know, I can tell from the accent. But but even people who went to public schools, there was never something that was like anti-Israel, anti-Judaism, or anything like that. There was never. I mean, if anything, just like how if we say religion, we respect all the messengers and the prophets, like, Moses, of course. Actually, I like to say one thing. Maybe some people who don't know this. In the Quran, the prophet that's mentioned the most, even more than Muhammad, is Moses. A lot of people don't know this, by the way, just FYI. But anyways, going back to my point, in the religion, in school, we never had in our curriculum anything that was anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, anything like that. So this is what I'm really blessed about our country. We've always had this respect for other people, even if we were not talking to them. And also something else, Michael, I like to say this repeatedly. Now I guess I can kind of like say this. The UAE and Israel have been talking for a long time. Some people don't know this, but they've been talking. I mean, our security system, if you come to the UAE, you can see Israel's fingerprint all over the place. I mean, especially with cybersecurity, defense, etc. They've been working together for the last 20 years. Now, it became, the UAE reached a point where they can actually, make a lot of things public about, whatever, where they stand in terms of geopolitics and everything else. And this is why it was fine. So yes, we can probably say it was, the US kind of like brokered the thing. But I also like to say at the same time, just to, because Fleur mentioned Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, they've been working on this for a long time. They've been talking to each other for a long time. So now it just became the opportunity for people to people, as Fleur mentioned earlier, for us to connect. But those people on the top, they were always talking.
And since then, we've seen, peace spiral and continue onwards, which is amazing. I want to ask you both, because about this following question, which is that, there hasn't been a universally positive reaction in the Arab world, and obviously there's been some rejectionism, and that includes the BDS campaign, which mainly operates in the West. And they insist that, Israel should be uniquely boycotted in the world, and therefore they have anti-UAE sentiment as well. What's your message to the BDS movement? Let me go to Fleur first.
Honestly, Michael, I think they're completely irrelevant. They're completely irrelevant. They're now more irrelevant than ever. They've had zero impact. I think it's a waste of energy for us even to talk about them. I know that the image is much worse than the actual impact. And for me, the best thing about the whole UAE thing is that, when we're bringing food products from Judea and Samaria into the UAE, nobody cares where it's coming from. They've made peace with Israel, and that's all they care about, A. And B, that the UAE is the anti-BDS, because when you go to supermarkets, they have a beautiful flag made out of flowers saying this is from Israel, proudly, not a label like in Europe saying this is from Israel, don't buy it. This is the opposite. They are celebrating that the goods are from Israel. And so it's the anti-BDS, and that's why BDS is irrelevant, failed, and we shouldn't be giving them oxygen.
Omar, what's your message to those who would reject these accords and say boycotts are the way?
Well, again, if it is, I just want to touch, I want to add on Fleur's point. With BDS, we actually in the UAE never had that. You couldn't even start that kind of movement. I love the system that we have in our country where, you're not allowed to have like street protests on stuff like this. And even if there was something that was happening between the Israelis and Palestinians, nobody was allowed to go out on the streets and protest. Like, we don't tolerate that kind of stuff, which is awesome. And I love the way the system works in our country, because it works for us, and it's been working for all the 9 to 10 million people that have been living there peacefully for the last 50 years. So it's fine that we have that. So we never really had this issue. Now, there are people, I can tell you this, there are people that have personally attacked me because, they were like, oh, you were with this, with the Abraham Accords and everything else. But you know what? In the end of the day, it's quite sad to see that those were the same people that have lived in the UAE, that were able to have a life in the UAE and buy homes in other countries, including here in the US. I know people who've been living in the UAE for the last 20 years or so. They were able to put their kids through school and everything, and they bought houses, and they live in some of the states in America, and still they're attacking me for the agreement and praising this agreement. I'm like, hey, listen, you were in our country, you milked the fruits of the country, and then this is how you show your thanks to the country. I mean, we didn't personally do anything to harm you in specific. You believe in a certain cause, and I felt it was very unfair, and that's why, as Fleur mentioned, I love what she just said. It's irrelevant. That's the perfect word. And they are irrelevant, so that's why we don't pay any attention to them. They can bark all they want, but we're good. And you know what? This is the time where it shows you who your true friends are.
Exactly.
That's a true story, and whatever the case, you're a brave man, Omar. I will say no more of them then, based on your advice. Let me ask you this, okay? It's prediction time, because we're going to have to wrap up at some point soon. So prediction time. What do you think are the next countries that are going to make peace with Israel? And what happens next in this whole process? Fleur.
Look, let's be honest. The big fish here, and I was quoted as saying that they're the white whale. The big fish here is Saudi Arabia. UAE didn't need Saudi Arabia's permission to do what they did, and that's why they were brave. Bahrain, on the other hand, did. And they got the nod from Saudi Arabia. And I think the next big country alliance has to be Saudi Arabia, because especially now when we don't know what's going to be happening in terms of America's relationship with Iran, we need to pull together. The forces of good, the forces of peace in the region need to pull together against the forces of evil and destruction. And so I am hoping, when I went to Bahrain, I definitely heard that Saudi Arabia is about to come, and we want to hope that they'll be next. Oman, great people. I met so many Omanis in Dubai, and they're the kindest, sweetest most generous people. Love Omanis. Kuwait, everybody tells me is going to be the last one. Don't know why. I have one Kuwaiti friend and he's fantastic. But that's what people tell me in terms of the Abraham Accords. I'm thrilled. I'm half Moroccan, so I'm thrilled that Morocco jumped on board. I didn't expect it to happen so soon. And so I was really pleasantly surprised.
Omar, what happens next in the Abraham Accords peace train? What's the next stop?
I was gonna say, to be honest, I'm between Oman and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, though, which was the shocker was when I saw the Israeli rally team take part in Saudi Arabia. That was huge. I was like, whoa, okay, that was really big. That was brave of those guys. So I'm really happy to see that. That means there's a very big sign, and I'm not sure whether it would happen during the time of King Salman or maybe when Mohammed bin Salman is on board. When Mohammed bin Salman is king, it's definitely, and I'm putting my money on that. I'm telling you, that's going to happen.
100%.
We all know Bibi was there twice in met Sultan Qaboos at the time, and they're ready. Oman, I feel that the only issue, and I'll tell you, I have a lot of family in Oman, by the way. Actually, from my last name, everybody who looks at my last name, they know originally I'm from Oman. I mean, the Qaboos's wife is Al Busaidy. So
that explains it.
Sultan Haytham, his wife, the current Sultan, his wife is Al Busaidy, and even Al Said is actually Al Busaidy as well. So originally I'm from there. So I can tell you this from the people I know as well. They're ready. It's just that I think they're playing this balancing act. Oman's always been this, like the Switzerland of the Gulf. This is what they've always said. Oman's always the Switzerland of the Gulf. They're trying to appease everyone. So, you didn't see the prime minister going to any other Gulf country, but they were in Oman. So Oman's always been like friends of everybody, and they're always chill. But they're just waiting for the right time to make that call. So I agree with Fleur. Kuwait, I wouldn't probably even put Kuwait anywhere yet, because Kuwait is, I watch the Kuwaiti parliament sessions all the time, and I think their system would make it very, very difficult for Kuwait to start relations with Israel, because it's a very sensitive place there.
Because it's a democracy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. For me, I see it's like a failed democracy there.
You're right.
I know this is gonna sound weird. I feel that Qatar might even be before Kuwait.
That's a good point, actually. We didn't talk about Qatar.
Yeah,
Qatar's an important player in the region.
Just one more point.
Do we think that's happening?
Qatar, well, they've now normalized with the rest of the GCC countries. So that was a big step. And that's a precursor for Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords and possibly Qatar joining the Abraham Accords. But to follow on from what Omar is saying about Saudi Arabia, one very important thing that circles back to what you were saying, Michael, they've taken out in the last 2 months incitement from their school curriculum. Now that is an amazing, amazing step. That's historic.
Yeah.
And
very important.
Right. The son will do it, because the son is westernized. He understands what's going on. And the same in Oman. There's a new ruler. He's young. He needs to, take his time, settle himself in, and then he'll do it too.
And obviously we should recognize as well that countries like the UAE and Bahrain have taken upon themselves the gold standard definition of anti-Semitism, which is something that we're asking institutions and legislatures and different bodies all around the world to do. It looks like the Gulf is actually helping lead people in understanding what anti-Semitism is, so that we can combat intolerance. And we appreciate that very much. Omar, will we see you in Israel soon?
Absolutely. And now there's a direct flight, so I can't wait, to see everybody in Israel. I've got so many friends. It's crazy.
We can't wait. Thank you so much, both of you, Fleur and Omar, for being with us. I would say assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, may peace be upon you and all of us. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
Such an inspiring panel. Now, you just heard Fleur and Omar mention that peace is made between peoples. Well, today we're proud to be launching the People's Abraham Accords. Away from the politicians and diplomats, we're taking peace to the people, and that includes you. You can take an active part in creating peace in the Middle East with the People's Abraham Accords. It's an incredible opportunity to not only learn about this momentous time in history, but play a role in bringing peace to your high school, campus, or community. You can interact with influential voices from the region, share your vision for the future with your peers, and contribute your time to our peace-building efforts. Stay tuned for more details as this campaign rolls out within the next few weeks, and there's something that you can do right now. We want people from all over the world to put their name to peace. So head to standwithus.com/Abraham Accords and be a part of the People's Abraham Accords.